Please welcome to the stage Dr. Kathy Kapica, a certified food scientist and member of the IFT Board of Directors.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to this session on Future Food 2050. This is going to be a very interactive session, so I encourage everybody to come down close. We're hoping you will be able to be very actively engaged in our conversation. From classrooms to kitchens and grocery stores and beyond, people are obsessed with a conversation around food. Easy access to a global audience through the internet and social media only elevates the level of this conversation. Food science and the critical role it plays in a healthful, safe, and affordable food supply is often missing from or mischaracterized as part of this conversation. Now you add to that today the word blogger and pundit are job descriptions, and that consumers rely upon health advice from people who proudly describe themselves with derogatory terms like babe. So we as food scientists are fed up with the one-sided, short-sighted story, especially in light of the critical need to feed the world's 9 billion plus people by the year 2050. So in response, IFT has launched Future Food 2050. This is a food science as a critical and crucial response as a solution to these problems approaching the world. This project coincides with IFT's 75th anniversary celebration. And this project has two main components. One is 75 articles based on interviews with food science leaders from around the world and is the basis for the website Future Food 2050 and outreach efforts. The other component of this project is a documentary film which showcases the important role of food science for today's food and food for the future. In this session today, we have the opportunity to be able to learn from the two team leads of these components, both on the written article side as well as the documentary filmmaker. Now, we really want your questions, because this session is really all about you and the opportunity to answer your questions and issues around why we're doing this in this way. So there's going to be opportunities to ask questions live later on, and you can submit your questions either online poll or through texting or through a tweet. And all that information is on the screen behind me. So anytime during this, please do online question submission, or later on, please come up live and be able to do this. We're going to begin today with Josh Schoenwald, who's a contributing editor to Future Food 2050. He's an award-winning, Chicago-based journalist and author of Taste of Tomorrow: Dispatches from the Future of Food. He's a graduate of Columbia University School of Journalism, and Josh's work has appeared in over 30 publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Slate, as well as the Wall Street Journal. Josh has been on many radio programs, including NPR, and has appeared at many conferences. Last summer, Josh had the opportunity to have a bite of the world's first in vitro hamburger made from meat grown from cow stem cells. So he is truly well-versed in the future of foods. Please welcome Josh Schoenwald.
Kathy. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I am extremely excited to be part of this conversation called The Filmmaker's Perspective, because I truly believe that this film has, of all parts of Future Food 2050, the film has a tremendous potential societal benefit. The unfortunate reality is that in 2014, there are many incredibly well-intended people who care about the environment, who care about having nutritious food, who care about humanitarian causes in the developed and developing world, but yet they have a reflexively negative view of any and all science and technology in food. You know, the reality and that absolutely is impeding the ability to have technologies that could help the food system. Now, I think that the very exciting thing about this project is that we can change this. So we can get, and this is a quote from the end of my book, The Taste of Tomorrow, that it shouldn't be binary, that you can support slow food and yet you're opposed to golden rice. We have to overcome that. And the reason I highlight the film as being particularly holding great potential is because, and here's my next slide, is that the reality is this is a huge, huge challenge. I mean, this is a glimpse of some of the emails that I received over the past week. Consumers are absolutely inundated with information, much of it junk science, about food. We are simply not going to change their attitudes about food and technology, about technology and science in food with one story or even 10 stories. It has to be a detailed, lengthy conversation. And that is the power of, I think, what Scott is embarking on right now. My hope in all aspects of this project is that we can get to a point where someone is going to buy their arugula from this organic micro farmer and yet at the same time fight for golden rice to be deployed. So I'm really excited to be here, Kathy, and engage in this conversation with IFT.
Thanks, Josh. I know many of you are wondering, well, why should we do a documentary film? Well, this video will give you a little insight into how we made that decision and why.
IFT is going to do a documentary as part of its 75th anniversary celebration, and it's really going to be to try and talk about food science, what food scientists have done in the past, but more importantly, what they need to do in the future.
We need to see where we've been, to see where we are, to see where we're going. And I think that's very, very important. A documentary will help us to capture those monumental achievements in food and food technology and help us move forward to the future.
Well, hopefully the storytelling that we have with the interviews that we have going on will help give firsthand experience that experts in the field feel are the challenges that face us in the future.
We'll have educators, administrators, and experts in the field to be able to give us their expertise in terms of the holistic point of view in terms of what food is all about.
We're hoping that the movie will help show how food science and food preservation are important tools to make sure that food gets to the people who need it. Because otherwise the food rots, goes bad, and it's just a waste and people go hungry. And without food science, we just can't get food to people in a stable, safe form.
The documentary that IFT is producing tells the real story of food science. The story of food science is not well known. As a matter of fact, we don't even discuss it in elementary school or secondary schools. When you mention food science to young people, they don't know what it is. It's time that we advocate what food science really is. Because of food science, we have food on your table today.
Today, everyone is looking for YouTube and videos, a very quick way to get the message. And I think having a movie will be much easier to use to communicate to different populations in the world. Remember that IFT is a global organization, so if we want to communicate that message to China, to Brazil, to South Africa.
We're going to be covering a lot of different topics in the movie, but the story of food is a global issue. That you walk into a store in my hometown and there's food from Chile and Australia and Europe, as well as from all over the Americas. So we have to understand the whole food system and make sure that people get what they need when they need it, and food science is a way to make that happen.
It's going to illustrate, hopefully in real-world examples, what we need to do and how we need to get more people engaged, more scientists involved to be able to help us solve the challenges going forward. I'm very excited about it. I think it's a tremendous idea.
So Scott Hamilton Kennedy, an Academy Award nominee, is a writer, director, producer, cameraman, and editor who is the Future Food 2050 documentary director. Some of his films include Fame High, The Garden, and Our Town. Scott's worked with CBS, Mattel, and DreamWorks, as well as many other companies. He's a California native and currently lives in Los Angeles area. Please welcome Scott Hamilton Kennedy. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here with you. It's so great to be back in New Orleans. I love this town so much. When IFT first approached me about making a documentary about the future of food, about feeding the world in 2050, and when the population is going to bloom to 9 billion people, I was humbled, I was honored. And every day since then, the story has just gotten more interesting and more complex. As we've heard already today, food, there couldn't be a more universal subject than food, but it's also a controversial subject currently. And I am so excited to be able to tell that story. At the same time, as a storyteller, the films that have moved me, that have engaged me, that have possibly even transformed me, aren't just about subjects, and they're not about controversies, they're about people. And the people, like the people in this room, the people that I've met in the research that we've done for the film, are food scientists, other scientists, are humble, hardworking, and it's a voice that I haven't seen in film before. So it's a great honor to be able to bring that voice to the world, and I hope to do you guys right.
Question for you. You live in California.
Sure.
And you hang out with all the Hollywood types.
All of them. Yeah, they all hang out with the documentary filmmakers, that's true.
What do your friends, family, and neighbors think about you taking on this project?
Aside that I'm now working with Monsanto. Well, GMO, Josh had a fantastic panel this morning about GMOs. It quickly goes to GMOs. The ignorance factor about GMOs within myself before taking the project on and with my neighbors is, what's the nice word to use? It's a little depressing at times and shocking how little people know about the facts about things like GMOs. But it has been fascinating. It's been some very lively conversations and only inspired me more to think that the film needs to be made, as Josh said in his intro, that the information is not getting out there. And sadly, one side of this conversation, mostly the anti-science side of it, has succeeded at turning people in a certain way currently. And I hope with the film that we can balance that out quite a bit.
Josh, how do you see people reacting to food technology today? And what do you think are some of the major consumer obstacles to acceptance?
Well, I think, as Scott was just pointing out, there is a reaction of, widespread negativity. I sometimes refer to it as like we live in this, this rising tide of foodie neo-Luddism. There's like this foodie fundamentalism, which is just, again, like reflexively rejects science and technology and food. And it is because of the steady stream of information that, from one side. That's why it's so exciting, this Future Food 2050 project, to see a massive effort to try to introduce this other voice and to tell the other side of science and technology and food. So I think that you could just see from that clip, there's an emotional power in storytelling through film that film brings that I don't think we've heard from this side of the debate, and that's why it's so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Now, Scott, your reaction to being asked to do this, what was your first reaction?
It was a bit of surprise. It was a bit of surprise at first because I didn't know of IFT, and wasn't even aware of the exact numbers of 9 billion in 2050. But it quickly, as I said before, it quickly moved to great honor and excitement as every day the story only gets more complicated, complex, fascinating, interesting. So it was a great honor.
You know, Josh, there's lots of books out there on food from a variety of sources that we wouldn't necessarily call credible, and probably need more scientific backing. What was the impetus for you to write your book about the future of food?
Well, I sort of discovered my concern about this rising tide of anti-science in food only through the journey of my book. The Taste of Tomorrow began with just a curiosity about what the dinner plate of 2035 would look like. It became just a quest to see the products and to see what a meal would look like. It was in the course of trying to answer that question and in digging deeper into the science and technology behind what changes food, that's when I discovered the story isn't so simple. It's the sources aren't the people who I trust aren't necessarily trustful on this issue.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, you have 2 daughters. How do you think this film and the implications of what you're learning about this film are actually going to have for them in the future?
Well, I like to say that I can deal with bad news, I can't deal with confusion. So if there's a lot of difficult decisions that are going to have to be made looking at 2050. There's difficult decisions we have to make today and 5 years from now. And what I like about science is it helps me get clarity on a complicated world and give me answers to certain things. So I hope it will help with that it won't, while there will be daunting tasks throughout, especially in terms of the climate, that through science we can have answers that can help my children and help their children.
You know, there's been several documentaries out about the food industry. You know, what do you see as the common denominator amongst them and the ripple effect that it's having on public perception of the food supply?
Well, I don't know if there's one part that is consistent throughout all those films. I mean, an easy one would be growing local and organic and things like that, but there are more issues than that in them. They are just, I haven't seen science necessarily represented in them, sadly, is the problem. There's wonderful aspects to a lot of those films. I love going to my local farmer's market. It's a privilege that I get to go to my local farmer's market. Even before the Stanford study came out that said that there is not much of a nutritional or basically no nutritional difference between organic and non-organic, I sort of had that feeling in my gut. Maybe it's because I didn't like spending the extra money, but what I went to a farmer's market for was for a craft, for somebody taking a little bit extra care, and that's fine, that's one thing. But I also go to Trader Joe's and I go to Whole Foods and I go to a variety of places. So sorry, to get back to your question, the net feels a little bit like they're speaking to a very small audience. And going to my frustration with confusion, using a film like Food Inc., Robbie Kenner, the director, is a friend of mine, and in a lot of ways it's a wonderful film. But there's a feeling of discomfort at the end of the film that I don't see any upside to only having a feeling of discomfort. Mm-hmm. If you can't say this is the way forward, there are problems out there, but this is the way forward, I don't want to frustrate an audience. I want to give an audience some clarity moving forward. So that would be one of the things we really hope to do with the film.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to invite the audience. Please come up to the microphones, and we'd love to hear the questions that you have for either Josh or Scott. So please don't be shy, and if you are, please then submit your questions online. Once again, the information to be able to submit online is here. So Josh, there's a lot of information on the Future Food 2050 website and stories from these different leaders in food science. Tell a little bit more about the website and how these articles are actually put up there and promoted in terms of like themes and things.
Well, the Future Food 2050 website is, I think, one of the largest projects devoted to telling stories about innovators in the food world. that's ever been undertaken. I was extremely interested to be part of this project because my book, The Taste of Tomorrow, is about the search for the next big things in food. And this is kind of like this amazing opportunity to do a sequel, to look for more characters. Like the way it's being organized is that each month there is a theme that we'll be exploring and highlighting between 3 and 5 pioneers in different aspects of applying food and technology to improving the food system, or to changing what we'll be eating in the future. For instance, this month a new series is focusing on food waste. And we will see, for instance, there's a profile of yesterday's keynote speaker. And you'll get a chance to learn about the many different ingenious ways that people are applying technology to greatly reduce food waste in our system. And this, we're not releasing the whole calendar for the year, but I do know that the next series of articles will be focusing on how technology and science is being used in Africa to improve the delivery of food in the developing world. Mm-hmm. So it's an incredibly exciting opportunity to really showcase just like a diverse range of applications of food and technology, of technology and science in the food system.
Scott, tell us a little bit about how a film is made. This is an audience that is probably not very familiar with that process, and especially a documentary film. So tell us what you're going to be doing.
Oh my goodness, it's a long process. Research, lots and lots and lots of research, which we've done a great deal and we will continue to do. Thank goodness for Skype. Skype has been a great friend, and I know there's some people in this room that have been kind enough to Skype with myself and my producing partner Trace to ask preliminary questions and get to the meat on the bones of the story. So it's a great deal of research, and when I teach documentaries, I often do this. I ask somebody what film they want to make, and they say, I want to make a film about food. My hands go like this, and through the process, we hope we're going to go like this and find the focus. And we're getting there. I mean, it's going to be, can we feed the world in 2050? Can we do it without damaging the planet? Who do we trust? All these things that you see in the teaser, and focusing on the cycle, the food cycle, from seed to farm to the table, policy, spin, all the way back to food waste and recycling. And looking at that cycle and saying, what are the most important aspects of that we have to look at in looking towards 2050? So it's still enormous, but we're moving towards it. So it's research, shooting, and then the editing process is it starts all over again in the editing process. The term writing is rewriting is really in the editing room, where you get through one cut of the film and you start to see what the movie is, and then you dial it in and you dial it in. So it's not a fast process, everyone. You don't want to watch me doing it, but
it sounds a lot like writing a book.
It is. Yeah. No. The writing is rewriting. If you don't embrace that part of it, you can be frustrated and get lost. And that rewriting part is you want to get to the end. We want to get to the end of the treatment to say, what is the whole story, so you can go back and really focus what it's going to be. So the first cut of the film, the first cut of my last film was 8 hours long, and the final film was 100 minutes. So you take those 8 hours and you say, now we really start to know what the film is about. So it's a process.
So what's the status of film production right now?
We're really just beginning. As you saw some of the footage in the teaser, we've already done a 10-day trip to Hawaii, where Hawaii's been referred to as the ground zero of the GMO battle. You also saw Dennis Gonzalez, the creator of Rainbow Papaya. He saved the papaya industry with his genetically modified papaya, stopping the ring spot virus, excuse me. And we're filming, as you guys have probably seen our cameras, and I'm a little itchy that I don't have my camera in my hand right now, shooting all of you, filming here as well. So it's the beginning, but the story is going to take us around the world, and we're really looking forward to it.
Now, Josh, for the website, and Scott, for the movie, are you just going to be talking to food scientists, and why would you want to talk to anyone else?
You're not leading us with that. Yes, we will be talking with more people than just food scientists. I've been introduced through this process the difference between ag science and food science. I think a lot of the audience might not know the difference and sometimes not need to know the difference. It's still science that is involved in the process of feeding ourselves. It's going to be very important to see the other side of the equation. You see Vandana Shiva and Jeffrey Smith in the teaser, and get those voices. Michael Pollan, if he will do us the honor of being interviewed for the film, and even if he isn't, he's going to be in the film because of the media that already exists on him. Josh pointed out in his lecture today, and we're very excited that he has come across the aisle and said that he eats the rainbow papaya, and he's okay with that, which is a huge step, especially when, if everybody doesn't remember who Michael Pollan is, not only a huge food writer, but also basically the featured voice of a documentary like Food Inc., and has had an enormous influence on the way people within the United States and around the world, certain people of influence, have thought about some of these issues. So to get somebody like that to say, to change their views a little bit is going to be very important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as to your question related to the website, there's 75 profiles, 75 interviews. It is going to be far more diverse than, you know, certainly food scientists will play an important role in who's profiled, and agricultural scientists, but there's going to be entrepreneurs, there will be activists, there will be policymakers, anyone who is contributing in what could potentially be an impactful way on what we eat in the future. And, you know, Doug Roush, who was here yesterday, he was profiled in this batch of stories. He's, you know, comes from Trader Joe's. So, you know, the goal is to be omnivorous in choosing the type of people who can make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll mostly spend time with food scientists. Just one. That was a
Don't
joke,
worry,
everybody.
mostly food scientists. No.
We got a question, I think.
Please come.
The FAO has estimated that 1/3 of total production is wasted in the order of 1.3 billion tons. And there was a documentary that was done in Germany that was presented at the the Save Food Congress in 2011 on Taste the Waste. Would some of that type of footage be included in your film?
I don't know that particular film, but we're absolutely going to be dealing with food waste in the film for sure, with Doug's work and other people's work for sure.
Okay, I can get you in touch with the director.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, Guy. Well, Guy's coming up.
Yeah.
There is one question that I know, and you've alluded to it a little bit, but I think we need to be really clear about the steps that we are taking to ensure that the film isn't criticized as a propaganda piece for the food industry. First of all, the film is being fully funded by IFT without outside contribution. So there is no outside funding for the film and the website. So what are you two doing to be able to deal with that potential issue?
Well, I think that is a absolutely critical issue. As someone who has talked about the possible benefits of biotechnology with a wide variety of audiences, you know, one of the first critiques you'll get is, you know, that you are a tool of Monsanto, or that there is some, you know, corporate influence behind what you're saying. So maintaining financial independence from a nonprofit scientific society is, I think, absolutely critical if it's going to be viewed as a credible voice in this conversation.
From the very early conversations with IFT, I brought up the idea of final cut. And when people hear final cut in a film, in a documentary or a feature film, it usually sounds like it's maybe something that almost ego-based, like I must have final cut because I'm an auteur. And not that I don't have ego issues that we can talk about later, but I brought it up in terms of this film because we want as best as possible to not be seen as biased. Now, there's also the term confirmation bias, which is going to be a part of the film as well, that all of us have biases that we have to struggle with. And do we only see the evidence as a scientist? Do we only see the information in a film that supports the world that we want to live in? And I'm going to have to fight that, you know, as for myself. But as a filmmaker, as a citizen of the world, as a father, I'm going to do everything that I can to tell the most honest story that I can, and it's been an honor that IFT has allowed me final cut for those purposes. So it's on me, as I've said before.
Guy, your question?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'm really delighted that IFT is supporting this. It's so frustrating to see the criticism of the food science and food based on total misinformation and anti-science. And I think this is really important because it's a lot easier to hate big food as a kind of an amorphous entity than see real live people proud of their work and doing things that arguably are going to save the world, literally. And Kathy actually stole my question. I was worried about us being criticized for, you know, in the first place, a lot of people are going, well, look who supported it, you know, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way things are coming, so I appreciate your talking about that. And also, I was wondering, how will the film be marketed and distributed? Because obviously it'd be nice to see it have a big splash, but nothing is free.
Sure. A lot of you in this room will be helping with the marketing of the film. Thank you. This is you are all the core audience, and people like you, the core audience around the world. And the reach of IFT, having IFT as a partner, has been very exciting that way. The built-in audience that's going to be there. So that would be the initial stage. We're going to take the film out, as I've taken my other films out to the world independently, and hopefully premiere at film festivals. And from those film festivals, you build up a distribution plan from there. It could, the distribution plan could be one where you have one distributor taking it on and they sell it to TV and they sell it to foreign and things like that. We might do it more of a, what would be termed an indie a la carte way. My last film had a small theatrical release. It was sold to Showtime on one side. It was sold foreignly separately. You can watch it on your phone right now through Amazon and AOL and Netflix and all those places. So we're going to go that same route. What I can't say is how far it's going to go because the market determines that. I feel very confident it's going to have a very large reach, though. So.
Okay. Question?
Good afternoon. I'm not sure how to ask this question very, very specifically, but it's really about the topic of how do you really coalesce heroes and villains, right? So this topic today, so you started, Josh, with a quote from your book. Sorry, I haven't read it.
Can you get a little closer to the mic? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
And so obviously in the trailer for the film, you're definitely juxtaposing heroes and villains as part of the story. And when I think about, I'm a marketer, not a food science, how do we create this platform that will coalesce people? And it is just, I had a chance to go to a university founded by the slow food revolutionaries. I'm the daughter of a French chef, and I've worked for Big Food. And all those things, and so in my class at this university, I was considered the evil capitalist. Right. And they would not accept any facts being part of the argument, right? So when you have a question about, like, fine, you should meet your farmer and you should only source food from a 100-mile radius. I just said Sao Paulo, 20 million people. Tell me how that's going to work. Well, let's not be confused by those facts. And what people should do is quit their jobs and move to become an agrarian society. And so the amount of emotion in this topic really belies much of the facts and the data. And what are your thoughts, both from the kind of communication platforms you have, on how do we coalesce the heroes and villains?
Let me just ask you one quick question. Your response argument, how did that work in this community of people that you inhabit? You mentioned your counter argument about, you know, basically feeding 9 billion.
Yeah, no, it didn't work. I tried everything. It was everything from, well, all big food. The people at Kraft are trying to make baby-fied cheese, was what I got told. And I'm like, no, they are not trying to take all uniqueness out of cheese on the planet, and I worked at Kraft. So facts about it weren't really compelling because it's obviously much more of an emotional story, and I wasn't answering it in an emotionally motivating fashion.
Sure, as you pointed out, that in a lot of stories there's you know, protagonists and antagonists, or heroes and villains, as you say. As much as those things are tools that we might use within filmmaking, I like to see life a little more as a bit more complex than that. That there's, you might say, heroes and villains in all of us, right? That we're fighting to do the best that we can every day, and how hard it is to succeed in that and not be distracted by money, power, greed, baggage issues, all of these other things that keep us from the path. What I will go back and say is we're going to tell all sides of the story, and there are some mistakes or adjustments that we can talk about in big food and big ag and big communication and all of the above. We're just going to try and tell the most honest and complex story as we can. And as I said before, I haven't heard this voice represented of food science in a film, and I'm really looking forward to getting that clarity in the film.
There's just a small point. There is no question that, in particular with this genre of food movies, has been very much, little guy versus big bad food. Like a small artisanal versus industrial and technological, and it's been so binary. And it is almost as if, films and stories are like reinforcing this Manichaean worldview that they have. To have a story with nuance and to be truthful and honest would be, remarkably refreshing. And just to even get people to embrace the idea of nuance, that there are some good things and some bad things, it's not so goddamn simple. Yes. Sorry. But there is kind of a frustration in the food conversation in that it does have just this tendency to be so simplistic.
Question.
I'm really glad to see that we're approaching it this way. When I finally left industry to go back into academia full-time in 2007, I actually contacted IFT, and I got to a conference and heard a physician say, the food industry is trying to kill you just like the tobacco industry. And I was really shocked, and I felt that unfortunately the industry took more of a, stay away approach, and so maybe it's my Latin heritage, but I see food as a thing to really bring people together.
Sure.
And so now that I'm teaching, I actually did a project that just sort of came around GMO labeling. I actually work in Chico, which was the beginning of the anti-GMO labeling in California, the legislation. And what I found is that students, of course, I work with students, and I have a threat to hang over their head called a grade to make them listen to me, which is different than the consumer. But what I found is as they engaged and learned about genetic engineering, food biotechnology, they became much more open. And I guess my question is, how can you help us all learn to communicate better with the public? Because I think that's a huge issue. I've heard food engineers and other scientists give the, you consumers, this is too complicated. And I think that's very insulting. Mm-hmm. I've worked mainly in consumer research in my career in the industry, and I really see a need to engage the consumers. So I guess that's what I'm asking, is how can we engage them more and maybe help diffuse some of the emotions?
Sure, it's going to be a big part. It's going to be a big part of the film, and I've heard that said many times that our food scientists natural at marketing themselves. Our scientists naturally gifted at marketing themselves. And to be honest, I think you all have been a bit too hard on yourselves. You guys are obviously incredibly smart. We'll leave that as a given, but also articulate and passionate. So it's getting it out there. It is simplifying it. That is one of the things that we, as a filmmaker, we can't tell every story about everything, and we do need to boil things down, and hopefully we don't boil things down in such a way that it doesn't lose the integrity and complexity, but we try to make it clear, and that is going to be one of our jobs. And we were talking with Betty Bagusu yesterday, a food scientist out of Purdue, who is there partnering with the communication department at Purdue and training scientists in communication. So things like that, I hope that would be even a scene in the film, seeing that confidence in communicating being fine-tuned.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that it is so important it's so encouraging to see that there is such an interest in the food science community in communicating with the general public. But the importance of being sensitive to your audience, like the way that you communicate amongst peers, the way that you communicate amongst trade journalists, and the way that you communicate with this population that we're trying to change their attitudes. The level of information, the tone, the use of, should you use fact or should you use anecdote? The power of story, like all of these types of questions that storytellers struggle with are also the questions that, scientists in kind of a, we're in a, in kind of an activist mode in trying to reset the conversation. Communications should be very much at the fore, and communication technique, I think.
That tone is the tone is very important. Will be very, very important in the film. It's very easy to, as we've said some of these things today, to say there are people that have gotten it wrong, and forgiving the metaphor, we want to almost punch them in the nose to get it right. And there's a reason for that energy, and at the same time, that offense with offense or defense with offense might not be the right answer. And what's affected me the most is when it comes through with honesty, humility, clarity, God forbid a sense of humor, and that is incredibly effective. So there'll be a lot of areas of tone, and sometimes there might be a little bit of poking with that tone as well. But getting that tone right. Somebody told me recently that in an argument, maybe this was between couples, but the person who feels that they're most right in an argument is the one that has the responsibility to diffuse it. It's a very interesting way of looking at it, right? That sometimes we're so right and we want to just keep saying we're right. Maybe I'm revealing too much about my marriage, but we'll leave that out of it. Is that we're so right that we want to hold on to something and say, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. But if you are, and this community, what we're talking about is you have the right of, as Michael Spector said, you have the right to your own opinion, you have the right to your own facts. If we have the right facts, and we can hold on to those, we don't have to say them in an angry way or a way to embarrass somebody else. We can say them in a clear way and use that as incredible power.
Question from the audience?
Yeah, I actually like to pick up a little bit on your comments on tone about humor, and then a piece on motivation. Just a quick note you may be familiar with. I'm a longtime food scientist, educated, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD in food science, so I've been doing this for a while. And there's a movie, Christmas Vacation, if you're familiar with. Clark Griswold was a food scientist. And I would recommend taking a look at adding maybe a little bit of the clip from how they portray food scientists in that movie. Because it's funny. And it adds in this misperception of how people view food scientists in a very pop culture kind of fun way. I just wanted to add that as a fun thing. I have been, my field, as I said, I have a background in food science, but my field now is sustainability. I bring my food technology into the work that I do with clients, looking at how to meet the needs that we're talking about, the 2050, how we're going to feed it, how we're going to do it responsibly without damaging the planet. And in that work, I've researched a couple books, just completed the compilation of my third book on this topic. And what I found in kind of the 10 years or so that I've been working on this space is that things have changed. 10 years ago, there was not a lot going on environmental social responsibility in the food industry, and so much more has been going on in the last couple years. And I find that incredibly motivating, and that's actually the theme of my third book, is really looking at the potential that we are seeing unfolding in sustainability. And so that's the other piece on tone that I'd just like to offer and maybe see how you're exploring that. Is a lot of the documentaries and information about the situation on food sustainability have been dire and depressing and kind of lack motivation and inspiration. So I see that there's potential, and I think that what you've shown in the snapshots is a more uplifting tone, and I think that's more motivating and really understanding the potential and opportunity. And I just want to see if you can comment on kind of building in that motivation and inspiration into your work.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm a glass half full kind of person generally, despite my Irish heritage. Just kidding, everybody. But at the same time, I mean, the title is Food Evolution. We wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be sitting in this room with this incredible technology if it wasn't for our relationship with food. At the same time, so if you're using my hand to say that we're on this trajectory of making progress, and we are making incredible progress, the sustainability side of it, the climate change side of it, is probably one of the most daunting aspects of where we are going as mankind. And did we possibly not look down the road far enough? Did we possibly not look down the road far enough and say, we are having ill effects on our environment, and clearly we're in a better place to understand those things, but I don't know as a globe if we're moving fast enough to fix those things. I think the people in this room are working on things within the food aspect of that to do good. I don't know if we're doing enough all throughout the world. So that part is dangerous in terms of hope and having some, again, hope of fixing these things. I do have confidence that we will meet those goals, but the environmental side of it has been one of the most daunting aspects.
We have a few minutes left.
Sure.
And so I would just like to throw out, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in communicating science is that human element. So Josh, how in your work do you see bringing that human element into making food science real? And the same question then for you, Scott.
Sure. Well, I certainly think that in storytelling about scientists, oftentimes, you do lose that human element and try to, paint a complete picture of the scientist beyond just their scientific work, to make them as a complete character. And certainly I've attempted to do that in my book work and in Future Food 2050. And also an aim is to show the motivation that's driving the food scientist. Scientists are often uncomfortable about talking about stuff beyond their research. So that's one thing for scientists to be mindful of, is when we're, as part of communication, is to, open yourself up, because that is part of emotive storytelling. And I also think that another big part of, taking stories about science and technology and food to general audience is narrative, stories. People listen to stories. There have been, you can hear arguments over and over about the GMO debate, but if it's framed in a narrative way, they might pay attention. Like, there's this great story in the New York Times by Amy Harmon, which had a living, breathing character trying to figure something out with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I hope that certainly something Scott, and if you've seen his movies, knows, and that we should also be very attentive to narrative in all of our storytelling work.
Good.
Yeah, there's not a lot. Excuse me. There's not a lot more I can say on that Josh didn't touch. But as I said at the beginning, the films that have been entertaining to me since I was 3 years old to today, that have moved me and possibly even maybe changed my point of view, transformed me in some way, aren't just about subject, they're not about issues, they are about people. And it's that human aspect of going on a journey, struggling with this amazing and wonderful world that we live in, this journey of life, of trying to figure out the correct way to live that life, that we relate to. That's the universal aspect of it. And I hope we had a little bit of that energy in the teaser, and we're going to find more and more of it through the characters that we follow throughout the course of the film.
Let me just say that if you think to what have been the game-changing movies or books in the food conversation over the past 20 years, I mean, the one that most comes to mind for me is The Omnivore's Dilemma. And part of the genius of that work is the storytelling.
Sure.
It's
a great storytelling.
and Fast Food Nation. Was, so storytelling does matter.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to take your advice immediately and then become a real person and confess I hate to cook. So don't come to my house expecting a home-cooked meal.
Did you say you hate to cook?
I hate.
Okay.
Hate to cook.
It's just a waste of time.
I love cooking.
It's a waste of time.
Just want to get and watch TV.
Not really. Well, I want to thank both of you very much for your time today, as well as the audience. Look forward to seeing more about the movie in 2015, and you can go visit the Future Food 2050 website regularly. Sign up to get alerts for when new stories come out. And let's give a big welcome, a big hand of applause to both Josh and to Scott for all the work they've done and will do.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you very much for coming today.